Welcome to Green Mountain at Fox Run's Holiday Eating webinar. We're so glad you could join us. I'm Laura Brooks with Green Mountain, which is a women's healthy weight center in Vermont that pioneered the non-diet approach to healthy weight management more than 40 years ago. And since then, we've been working to help women learn to enjoy eating foods they love in a way that makes them feel well and supports healthy weights. Obviously, this is a big issue during the holidays. Your presenters today are Marcia Hudnall, MSRD, President and co-owner of Green Mountain at Fox Run, and Erin Recius, MALPC, our Program Director. Marcia personally knows the struggle with eating and weight, having recovered from disordered eating over 30 years ago. Her mission at Green Mountain is to help women find peace and joy in eating again. She has been a voice of reason for the last 3 decades in helping people move away from diets. Erin has been helping women to create a healthier lifestyle for over 20 years as a professional in the fitness and psychology fields. Her focus in her work stems from her background as a professional fitness trainer and licensed professional counselor, but also her personal journey around healing her relationship with her body by discovering the middle ground with food and exercise. Erin's mission is to help others bridge that gap between insight and action around self-care for sustainable health and well-being. Green Mountain is pleased to be able to offer this webinar. I'll now turn the program over to Marcia.
Thanks, Laura. Excuse me. We're pleased to be here today to discuss really how to manage during what has become one of the most challenging times for women who struggle with eating and weight. And of course, that's the winter holidays. In the typical scenario of holidays past, for those of us who are fortunate enough to participate in the abundance of food that many of us have these days, is a picture of either resolutions to be quote unquote good during the holidays and really not partake of the wonderful food during this time of year, or to adopt a don't care attitude that really ends up with us eating without regard to how we feel. And when we do that, we often also forget about any other form of self-care. So what we want to do today is really give some insight into how to change that picture. And we're going to try to leave some time at the end of the webinar too to answer some of your specific questions. So, okay, Laura, I am not being able to move my slides. Wait, I did it. Okay. So our objectives today are really to talk about how letting your body guide you in what you really want to eat helps you eat those special treats of the holidays in a way that leaves you feeling good, and why fitness routines tend to fizzle during the holidays, and why something is better than nothing, which is a fitness theme mantra that we have here at Green Mountain. We're going to also look at how to manage holiday food choices based on what you enjoy without feeling out of control, and how the pressure about what you should and shouldn't eat, quote unquote, on both of those words, only enhances the forbidden fruit response. To get started, though, I want to just talk about a couple of facts here. Some research done a while ago looked at the average weight gain during the holidays, and it was really only about a pound for the average person. But when you looked at higher weight people, they found that the tendency was to gain more than 5 pounds. And the question there really is what is the difference? Why do higher weight people gain more weight? And there are a couple of important points to make about that. First is that many people are larger naturally, and they're perfectly healthy and happy at that weight. And we're not talking about those people with these statistics. What we're talking about, those who struggle around their weight and who've in the past tried to change it through dieting and restrained eating. And we know that the statistics are also quite clear about that. Dieting and restrained eating actually only makes the vast majority of people larger. Instead of losing weight, they end up gaining it. So when we look at why some higher weight people gain more weight during the holidays than the average person, the answer really is the diet mentality. And that's those rules that diets have implanted in our brains about what is legal, what's illegal, what's quote-unquote fattening or good for you or bad for you, all these ideas that we've learned through diets. And even if a person doesn't diet, we often find that their attitudes and behaviors around food are governed by these rules. Really, it's just become a societally wide accepted notion about how we should eat. Unfortunately, however, the rules often don't match reality, what a person wants or even needs in the moment. And because they don't, what generally happens is that we inevitably break the rules and we end up in a cycle that is fueled by negative self-talk, and that often leads us to more eating and then ultimately into a pit of despair. And that may sound dramatic, but it is a description that resonates with many of the women who come to Green Mountain at Fox Run. That pit of despair is a place of defeat and desperation that leads us back to diet rules. So what we want to do is, in this webinar, is to help you move from this old way of thinking to one that supports you in eating in a way that makes you feel good in the moment and long after. And that's really what mindful intuitive eating is all about. So to get us started, I want to just consider a typical holiday eating scenario. And with Halloween coming up next week, it's timely to use that as an example. So say that your kids came home Halloween night with 2 huge bags full of candy, and that's certainly something that is entirely possible these days. But today, kids, so in this scenario, say the next day the kids are at school, but the candy's in their room and it's calling to you. So you resolve not to eat any of it, but you give in before the morning's up, and once you take that first piece, you just go for it, eating whatever you pick up next. And you hope the kids don't notice how much you ate, but you certainly do. So you skip lunch to make up for it, and before the afternoon is out or over, you're back into the candy and not at all feeling good about yourself. So to change that scenario, we want to discuss sort of a 5-point plan for holiday eating. And the points are listed here, but I want to talk about each one of them individually. So the first one is to give up all those notions that we have learned through diets. Again, that some foods are inherently bad, or they're quote-unquote fattening, or we shouldn't eat them for some reason. And those rules make some foods forbidden, and that really only adds to their appeal because, forbidden fruit does taste the sweetest. We've experienced that in other areas of our lives too, and it certainly applies when it comes to food. Instead, we want to let our bodies take the lead and tell us what feels good to us and what doesn't. And sometimes cake or Halloween candy is really the best choice, and it's the dose that makes the difference. Richer foods can be very good for us if we eat them in a way that we truly enjoy, savoring them and listening to our bodies to tell us when enough is enough. But stopping eating such foods is often the challenge for women who struggle around this issue for a long time. And a lot of that is because fear causes us to disconnect with our bodies when we eat such foods. We want them, but we fear eating them because we think they're going to make us gain weight, or that we can't stop eating them once we start. So we eat them without really truly experiencing them, and that's one reason we can never get enough. Some of us also have emotional connections to food that go beyond the diet mentality, but the diet mentality is often still fueling that struggle. So it's important to let go of that while we're working to develop other ways to effectively soothe ourselves other than using food. So we want to give up diet rules and really adopt a neutral approach to foods, moving away from the good and bad labels and being present and aware when we eat so we can listen to our bodies, which were designed to tell us very effectively what, when, and how much to eat. So our second point builds on that, and it is a way to support your body in accurately telling you what you need. Eating predictably is about managing hunger, and hunger is a very powerful physiologic drive that is part of our survival system. And when we effectively manage our hunger, we can significantly boost our ability to make choices in our own best interest. When we talk about eating predictably, we're talking about eating when you are actually physically hungry and making it a priority to do so. And that's because when we don't eat when we're physically hungry, it sets us up for overeating. Our hunger is like a rubber band. If we pull it back gently, it's going to pop back to the middle. But if we pull it back too hard, it shoots across the room. We're both attracted to richer foods when we're overly hungry. The salad just doesn't appeal half as much as the burger and fries. And we eat more quickly, often passing the point at which we've had enough before we realize it. Now, we all sometimes get too hungry. Going too long between meals or missing a meal isn't an uncommon experience in today's busy lifestyles, but when it becomes something that we do regularly is when we're trying to cut back calories to lose weight, then it can set up a cycle of undereating and then overeating. And the end result is that we can develop a pattern of failing to notice those early stages of hunger, so that when we begin to regularly get too hungry before we eat, regardless of whether we're consciously trying to eat less or not, we then end up consistently overeating, and that can actually knock our appetite regulatory system out of balance. And those are those hormones that signal when we've had enough to eat. They don't really work as well anymore. And eating predictably helps us get all this back into balance. For those of us who are right now not too sure about when we're physically hungry or don't recognize our hunger before it's extreme, we do encourage eating every 3 to 5 hours or so and paying close attention to how our bodies feel when we begin to eat. There's a wide variety of ways that our bodies signal hunger, and it can differ from person to person. But after eating regularly and paying close attention for a while, we can become clear about our cues for physical hunger, and we don't have to eat by the clock. We recognize when we're hungry, and then we don't need the clock to tell us to eat. This hunger scale is a scale that we use at Green Mountain to help people get in better touch with their cues, and it really just describes the different stages of hunger. And when we look at it, 3 to 4 is really the stage at which we ideally want to begin eating. If we're getting down here into the 1 to 2 areas, we end up being too hungry, and that can set us up to eat over here into this area. So this is just something that we really encourage people to experiment with as they're eating. It's also important to realize that if you're eating a food that you feel like you shouldn't be eating because of diet rules, you may have a hard time finding that point at which you've had enough. And that's because feelings of deprivation and guilt can keep us caught up in our minds instead of truly connecting with the experience of eating. And that can often leave us feeling like we never ate. Our third point here is about eating slowly and savoring, because that's where we find true enjoyment. And if we eat too quickly, we don't savor, and we miss out on much of the pleasure that we get from eating. Again, we often eat quickly because of the guilt or feelings of failure that we're experiencing, and we set up this negative self-talk in our heads about whether we should be eating certain foods. And that negative self-talk is decidedly unpleasant. We're really beating ourselves up in our minds, telling ourselves things like we're hopeless, or we don't have any self-control, or there's something wrong with us, that we can't stop eating certain foods. So we really try to get through it as fast as we can. And what the end result is that we end up missing out on the pleasure. Eating slowly is also important to digestion and metabolism. When we eat too fast, it produces stress, and that really can interfere with the optimal functioning of our bodies, which is really fundamental to feeling good. And then our fourth point is to another way of supporting our body's ability to tell us what we really need. And it means about eating in balance and eating foods that make you feel well while you're eating them and after. And this point really has 2 parts. The first part is about pleasure. It's not something you hear a lot of people talk about when they're discussing healthy eating, but food is one of the greatest pleasures of life, and pleasure is good medicine. So the trick is to find the right dose, and we do that by staying mindful, paying attention to, and trusting what our bodies are telling us about what we need regarding food. And when we enjoy it, we'll also keep us doing it, so we avoid that on-again, off-again treadmill that doesn't take us where we want to go. The second part is eating in a way that to support that appetite regulatory system that I already mentioned. And in general, that means eating foods that contain protein, fat, carbohydrate, fiber, and fluid. And these are protein foods such as meat, fish, poultry, beans, eggs, nuts, dairy, grains and starchy vegetables such as breads, rice, potatoes, winter squashes, and then fruits and vegetables. And these types of foods provide all the basic nutrients that our appetite regulatory system needs to tell us accurately what, when, and how much to eat. And if we're regularly skipping out on any of these, as we do in certain diets, we're likely to be getting inaccurate information from our bodies. And then our fifth point here is about experimenting. It's about approaching eating with an open mind and letting go of all those preconceived notions about what we should or shouldn't eat, and instead observing our experience and figuring out what feels good to us as we eat and what amounts, and knowing that there aren't any mistakes. It's just a matter of trying something and figuring out if it works for you. And we can do this by exploring questions such as, am I hungry? What do I feel like eating? And then as we eat, to stay present and ask ourselves questions like, do I like the taste? This can make a big difference to whether we keep eating something. And when does the flavor start to fall off? This is one of the ways that the body tells us when we begin to feel satisfied. Am I still hungry? We're watching for other physical cues that signal that we've had enough. And then, have I had enough? The answer can be based on the pleasure we continue to get from eating, as well as whether our hunger is gone. And at some point, though, if you're really present to the experience, you can find the pleasure starts to wane also. And when things don't taste as good anymore, it really is easier to stop. These are just another couple of points that are important for eating well during the holidays. And at Green Mountain, we strongly encourage women to stop thinking about their weight and instead focus on how they feel. Because when we're focused on our weight, we really have myriad opportunities to go down the wrong path. And those are paths that don't take us where we want to go. When we focus on how we feel, we're focusing on the attitudes and behaviors that support health, and healthy weights are a byproduct of health. Our bodies find healthy weights because they like to be in balance. So support your body in finding its healthy weight by taking care of yourself and focusing on keeping yourself feeling good. The other point here is that we want to trust our body to do the work that it was designed to do. And we've been taught that our appetite is our enemy, when in reality is another part of our survival system that evolved to keep us searching for food. And the trick is to befriend it, to support it in giving us accurate information about what we need to feel well, and then trust that it does that. So I just want to end my part of this talk by returning to our Halloween scenario and see how it can play out differently with our 5-point plan. So in this new scenario, before Halloween even comes around, instead of resolving not to eat any of the candy your kids bring home, you decide you'll consider what you really want when it's there. And you begin the day after Halloween with an enjoyable, balanced breakfast that keeps you satisfied throughout the morning. You get hungry again around noon, think whether you want to have candy then, but then you decide that you need a satisfying lunch first. And maybe you'll have some candy as dessert. So when you finish your main meal, you check out what's in the bags of candy. You choose a couple of pieces that really appeal to you, and then you eat them slowly, savoring them. When you finish the two, you decide that you want one more piece, and then after eating it, you realize you're satisfied and you don't want any more. So you go on the rest of your day, really forgetting about the candy. And this may seem like a pipe dream to those of us who've struggled around food for a long time, but it is possible to move from an anxious, fearful relationship with food to one where food really takes its rightful place in our lives, something to be enjoyed as part of satisfying our fundamental needs. So I'm going to hand it over to Erin right now to talk about what else we can do to support ourselves in eating and living well during the holidays as well as long after.
Thanks, Marcia. Okay, so I'm going to segue into movement. And, often during the holidays, physical activity can inadvertently fall off the priority list due to a variety of reasons. The three main ones that I find is, just the craziness of the holidays. I mean, family obligations, the to-dos, holiday shopping, parties, etc. It's just, exercise can become another reason that becomes too crazy in the to-dos of the daily goings on. There's also the what the heck response, which let's say, for example, with the food that Marcia was just talking about, let's say that all of a sudden we feel like we're being bad with what we're eating. Maybe that will lead to maybe kind of not doing exercise as well. It's kind of the what the heck, I'm not doing it all good, so I might as well just not exercise either. The third common reason is the approach to exercise, which I'm going to expand upon much more. But, you know, if exercise is not enjoyed, but something to be endured, it tends to fall off the priority list quite fast. And especially during times of stress, it can quickly feel like another to-do, again, like I said, in one's day instead of a way to take care of self and to nurture oneself. So this tendency is what I want to focus on in the next part of this webinar. Okay, so this picture here, often people associate exercise with this experience, the no pain, no gain approach, because they feel it's what's needed for health and weight management. However, this approach only sets one up for a psychological resistance to movement, and especially, as I just mentioned, during times of stress. The no pain, no gain approach is the norm, but in my personal as well as professional experience, I have definitely observed that this approach does not work well for most people. It comes at a very high cost to one's health, and usually in the form of injury, potentially illness, and it definitely doesn't foster exercise adherence for most people. So I call the no pain, no gain approach to exercise dieting, because there is a lot of information on the next best exercise fad, but this approach is the basis of most of these fads. So needless to say, just like food diets, with exercise dieting, there is a high dropout level because it's simply not sustainable. So think New Year's resolutions. Every year on January 2nd, the gyms are busting at the seams, and if you look around, it's not about the joy of movement as much as enduring the pain of exercise. There's a sense of urgency in that. Yet, inevitably, by Valentine's Day, the gyms are typically back to normal levels because this approach is just not sustainable. Again, injuries, illness, and quite frankly, self-preservation tend to take over. So again, this dropout level has nothing to do with a lack of willpower, and it has everything to do with the approach taken. So the no pain, no gain approach is a common reason why exercise falls by the wayside during the holidays, because it feels like, again, another to-do on a long, long list of to-dos. So, as I said before, exercise patterns tend to mirror eating patterns. If there's an all or nothing approach with food, the same tendency can go for exercise. So for example, with eating behavior, the typical pattern that we tend to see for participants who come to our program, at least initially, is that there's a pendulum swing between emotional or binge eating and then all the way over to food restriction. So food restriction in the way of dieting. And then with movement, how we see this is maybe they're coming in with sedentary behavior or very little exercise happening. And then really at home, what their tendency would be is to go all the way over into the no pain, no gain approach. So both ends of the spectrum require one thing, and that's overriding the body's cues. So the key to maintaining an exercise program is to strive for the middle ground, moderation with exercise intensity, duration, and frequency. So your middle ground with movement will depend on what you are currently doing now for exercise, but as well as any orthopedic injuries or conditions in the body. So the only way to experience middle ground, what middle ground feels like, is to tune in to the body with movement so that you can begin to reconnect to the body's cues outside of just the all or nothing paradigm. And then learn how to best honor what your body can do based on the body that you have today and the conditions in your body. So I want to now talk about what we teach our program participants here at Green Mountain. It's the 4 principles for making fitness a way of life. These principles do foster exercise consistency, and especially during those times in life that can easily become a distraction, an excuse for veering away from our exercise routines. These 4 principles are centering, your pace is the pace, something is better than nothing, and finding the joy in movement. So first with centering. Centering is really just the practice of mindfulness or body awareness. It's about being in the here and now before moving the body. It's really important to tune in before we introduce a load in the way of strength training or before we kind of start moving our bodies or jumping up and down or walking, it's important to check in. Centering is a conscious physical alignment of the spine as well, so that whether you are sitting, standing, walking, strength training, or stretching, you can actively tune in to the body before movement. Now, centering can be done anywhere, and it only takes a few seconds to complete each cycle. And you know, it really forms the foundation, the practice of tuning into the body. It's basically the ready position before movement. Now, in case you're listening to this webinar and you're sitting, I want to just walk you through what is a seated center exercise. So if you sit with feet shoulder width apart, your feet are flat on the floor, your knees should be bent at 90 degrees, and now you want to align the spine by activating the pelvic floor. Now, activating the pelvic floor will then cause your core muscles to activate in response. When activated, your core muscles will hold the body in a state of good posture. So what all that means is that for women, this activation can be done with a simple Kegel movement. Now, in case you don't know what a Kegel is, the Kegel is basically the act of stopping urination midstream. It's the same muscles. So this creates a slight activation of the pelvic floor, thereby engaging the core muscles. It's as simple as that. That is centering. And that's something that it's important to do. So for a standing center, you would do the same thing. You would have feet shoulder width apart, but you want to make sure that your knees are slightly bent. Okay, you don't want to stand with locked knees because that actually limits the blood flow from returning from the lower extremities back to the heart. So it limits the flow. Obviously, it doesn't stop it. But so that's important to really make sure, again, that you're centered before movement. This practice of tuning in before movement really sets the stage for mindfulness. Okay, the next principle is your pace is the pace. This, you know, in order to ensure that you are setting up a psychological reinforcement to movement, it's important to use the RPE scale for cardiovascular activity, strength training, and stretching. Now, RPE stands for the rate of perceived exertion, and it is a scale based on a 1 to 10 rating intensity, with 1 being very low intensity and 10 being very high intensity for exertion. So the goal with movement is to always work within a 5 to 7 on the RPE scale. Okay. Often people have the all or nothing approach to exercise and mistake fatigue, pain, and aches as necessary for results. It's not needed, and that's the good news. So using the RPE scale helps to keep exercise within that middle ground, which is important for making an activity feel doable, good, and dare I say, enjoyable. So while centering will allow you to check in before movement, the RPE scale will condition you to check in during exercise so that you can learn to feel and then honor your body's cues as you're exercising. This approach simply feels better. It encourages consistency because we're tuning in and honoring the body as we go. And it's also, I want to point out, it's not about keeping up with someone else's pace, especially if you are involved in group fitness or go on group walks with friends or anything with another person. It's easy to get caught up in their intensity and what they're doing. So as a reminder, it's important to center and then to use your own RPE scale and check in with how you are feeling, and then slowly but surely learn how to honor your body so that you can reach your goals in the presence, not absence of health. Okay, the third principle is that more is not necessarily better, but that something is always better than nothing. Okay, again, we see that movement patterns tend to mimic eating patterns, which is the all or nothing pendulum swing. This is especially true during the holidays due to that what the heck response I was talking to you about, such as, you know, I already blew it with food, so why move? Or I can't squeeze out an hour of my regular exercise, so why bother doing anything at all? Okay, this is the all or nothing tendency. Doing something is always better than nothing. Okay, research shows that just 20 minutes of moderate, so not high intensity, but just moderate intensity, so between that 5 and 7 on an RPE scale, it can improve mood for several hours after working out. And this research also showed that there was still an elevation from baseline mood 12 hours later compared to those who did not exercise. This is huge, and it really speaks to the mental and emotional benefits of moving your body in a way that's moderate, gentle, and really within that middle ground. So following this something is better than nothing approach certainly fosters consistency with movement, and it takes precedence over intensity and duration. Okay, so finding creative ways to get in activity throughout your day, such as maybe sitting on the Fitball during TV, or stretching while watching TV, walking 10 minutes a couple times a day so you can get that 20 minutes in, a micro break at work to walk around the office building just to get the blood flowing and some oxygen circulating. So all of these things help to keep the consistency of movement in place. You don't need to be training for a marathon to achieve health and fitness, or even running for that matter, unless you want to and you enjoy it. In fact, just as I mentioned, research is showing that moderate intensity exercise provides more benefits, again, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Okay, the fourth principle is to find the joy in movement. So if you find yourself bored with your fitness routine or uninspired to start one, that tells me it's time to experiment with different types of activity. Okay, we actually teach a class here called Finding Your Fitness Style, and the class is really important because for those who come in to see us, they tend to have some not so great experiences with exercise in their history. So it really becomes, well, how do we not try and fit someone in a box, but then really, again, acknowledge and honor what it is that they enjoy. So we want to look for activities that match their personality and interests. So, for example, do you like indoor versus outdoor movement? Do you like working out alone, or do you prefer a group? Do you like dance movement as opposed to, say, more group fitness classes? So it's important to experiment so that you can discover what you like as well as what you don't like. If it feels like a means to an end, then try something different. I always say, don't try harder, try different. It's easier to keep our exercise consistency in place if we enjoy the time we spend doing it. This is very, very important. So, when it comes to starting or maintaining an exercise program during the holidays, try using these 4 principles to evaluate your current exercise routine or the ones you've done in the past. It might shed some light on why activity falls off the radar until January 2nd, possibly. So using these principles will help to set yourself up for success before the new year, because they can serve as a springboard for enabling you to move in a way that fosters attunement to, not distraction from your body, which is truly key for optimal health and fitness. So exercise can be one accessible way to help manage stress during the holidays, and really ongoing, really. But I also want to talk to you about other ways that you can prioritize self-care for stress management. Okay, so the first one is, we call it front-loading with self-care. So really about practicing managing stress in the body. Okay, the first strategy, as Marcia already discussed, is to feed yourself predictably and well. This prevents chaotic eating, which will then help to prevent the all-or-nothing pattern with food. The second strategy, as I just talked about, is to move the body regularly in ways that feel good and that are enjoyable in order to set the stage for consistency. And remember, something is better than nothing. The second step is to practice managing stress in the mind. So our thoughts will dictate our feelings, and our feelings often tend to impact our behavior. So if you find yourself anxiety-ridden, stressing out about food or situations during the holidays, the first step is to take a deep breath. This will calm the body, and it helps to interrupt that downward spiral that can occur with the negative thoughts or with the anxiety. It interrupts the autopilot, and it really enables one to feel more centered in the moment and more grounded. Okay, the third step is to practice recognizing and then managing your feelings in the moment. Now, this could be its entirely own webinar, but if you're used to numbing out your feelings with food or eating, kind of distracted eating to manage stress, the best way to shift that pattern is to learn how to better respond to soothing self in the moment. So exploring alternatives that you can use in what we call in the heat of the moment times. This could be, if you're at a party and you're in front of foods that may be triggering for you, or if you're at family time. Such situations are endless, but it's understanding what do I need in this moment, or what do I need to kind of come back to later on when I'm alone and can actually take care of myself and the feeling that came up. So examples would be journaling, taking 5 deep breaths, meditation, pleasurable activity, a hot bath, or one of my favorite techniques, which is hand to hand on heart. This simple act of putting both hands on your heart, taking a deep breath in those moments, can really help to better manage what you're feeling. And remember, even if it's only for a moment, something is better than nothing. Okay, and so the last way to manage stress is to really practice feeding your spiritual and creative parts of self. Okay, at Green Mountain I teach a class on the 3 types of hunger. It's physical, emotional, and spiritual. And it's the spiritual hunger that elicits the most aha moments. So spiritual hunger is feeling deprived of meaning, purpose, joy, passion, pleasure, connection to self or to others. Now, if this resonates for you, then it becomes a place of exploration. The question becomes, what am I really hungry for? What really matters to me? So often these questions help to unveil what it is that we really need around embodying self-care. So life can be chaotic at best, and especially during the holidays, but if you begin practicing ways to care for yourself now, gathering tools on how to help yourself in ways that really feed you mentally, emotionally, and physically, as well as spiritually, you may be surprised at how quickly your body and mind will respond to being listened to and honored. I love this quote by Janine Roth, and she says, in order to understand what your body needs, you have to care enough about yourself to listen. And that's all I have. I'm going to hand it back over to Laura. Oh, quickly, yes. I want to give a quick plug for our book, Eating Happy. It's written by Marcia. And this book is wonderful. It discusses a lot of these points that we just talked about, with an emphasis on helping those who struggle with binge and emotional overeating. And it's due to be published within the next month, so please watch out for that. Okay, Laura, back to you.
Well, thank you, Marcia and Erin, for an excellent overview of an approach to truly eating well during the holidays. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today. We hope what you've learned here has been helpful. We have a few minutes. Would anyone care to raise their hand or ask a question? We can take 1 or 2 before we conclude. But if you think about a question, please type it in. For more than 40 years, Green Mountain at Fox Run has transformed the lives of thousands of women who struggle with eating and weight. I want to invite you to spend some time with us at Green Mountain. Here you learn more about the approach described today and begin to practice it in the company of like-minded women who share the struggle around food, weight, fitness, and body image, and you're guided by our highly experienced and very compassionate staff. In November and December, we're featuring our Holiday Helpings theme to help our participants thrive, not just survive through the holidays, but the points serve well throughout the year too. We also have a special for November and December stays, and if you enroll by midnight this Saturday, October 25th, you'll receive a $500 Green Mountain gift certificate. So we wish you all a very happy Halloween, happy holidays, and we hope you enjoy the season to its fullest. I do have a question here, and the question is, it's just someone thanking us so much for the, well, thank you. It's someone who said that it's great to hear Marcia and Erin, and they like the topic was spot on. So thanks very much for your comment. We certainly appreciate everyone giving their time to us today. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, so on behalf of Marcia, Erin, myself, and Green Mountain at Fox Run, thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.